The senator from Texas yield for a question without yielding the floor.
I'm very happy to yield to my friend from Florida for a question without yielding the floor.
Thank you, Senator. My first question is, what'd you do last night?
Thank my friend from Florida from that question. You know, I had a delightful night. I had a chance to read some Bastiat, some Ayn Rand, to read some tweets. There are few things more enjoyable than reading tweets. And I hope that you and I, Senator Lee, the many other senators who participated in this, I hope we have had some positive impact on moving this debate forward and making clear to the American people both the train wreck, the nightmare that is Obamacare, as in the words of James Hoffa, president of the Teamsters, but also that right now too many members of this body are not listening to the American people, and the only remedy for that is this week the American people demanding that we make D.C. listen.
Would the senator from Texas yield for a follow-up question without yielding the floor?
I'm happy to yield for another question without yielding to the floor.
First, an observation. It's interesting how much times have changed around here. If a decade ago you were to tell someone you were tweeting on the Senate floor, that would not be a positive thing. People would think that that meant something else. So the world has changed a lot. And I think you've highlighted earlier in some of your speeches that you were giving here about what a positive development that's been. You know, it wasn't so long ago that in order to be able to do something in politics, to make a difference, to mobilize people to take action, you needed the benefits of the formal organizations that existed. You know, you needed groups or the establishment, as whatever term people want to use, to get things done. But one of the things that's really completely changed American politics is that anybody can become a political activist now. Because of access to social media, because of access to Facebook and Twitter and Vine and Instagram and all these other programs, anyone can now take action and speak out. Anyone can now connect with like-minded people halfway across the country, or quite frankly, halfway around the world, and begin a cause. And in many respects, that's what I think you see happening in this country now. You know, there's a lot of talk about how Washington has changed, how there's things happening now that didn't used to happen before. I'm convinced that one of the reasons why is because people now have access to things that are happening in real time. And they have the ability to speak out on these things in real time. Again, it used to be that, you know, you'd have to turn on the TV at 6 o'clock in the evening or 6:30 to watch the evening national news. Not anymore. News is reported on a minute-by-minute basis. Even as I speak now, there's someone out there covering it. There's people out there saying something about it. And I think by and large that's been a positive development because it's empowered individual Americans from all walks of life, not just to be aware about what's happening in this Capitol, but to engage in it, to speak out and to be heard. And at the end of the day, this republic depends on that, on an informed citizenry that is also able to speak out on the issues of the day and communicate with the people that work for them. Let me tell you what I hear from the people that I work for in the state of Florida. I hear tremendous concern about the future. We focus a lot around here on specific issues, and we should. The national debt is a crisis. Our tax code is broken. Our regulations are out of control. We're talking about Obamacare right now, which has been hugely detrimental to the American economy and to the aspirations of individual Americans. But overriding all of this is the central concern that I find increasingly on the minds of people. And let me describe it as this. I know that as a country we're divided on a lot of issues. You look at the polls. You look at the elections. I know that the country is divided on a lot of important issues. And that's why this body and this Congress is struggling to find consensus on many of the major issues we confront. But let me tell you what I believe is still the unifying principle that holds our nation and our people together. And that unifying principle is the belief that anyone who is willing to work hard and sacrifice should be able to get ahead. The idea that if you are willing to work as hard as you can, to make sacrifices, you should be rewarded for that with a better life. Now, by the way, when we talk about a better life, it's not the guarantee that you'll ever be a millionaire or a billionaire, but it generally means the ability to find a job that's fulfilling, that helps you feel like you're making a difference in the world, a job that allows you to do something you love for a living, and a job that pays you enough money to do things like buy a house, provide a stable environment for your family, save so your kids can go to college, and so that you can retire with dignity and security. And we still believe that it is unfair As a people, we are unified in this belief that it is unfair that people who are willing to work hard and sacrifice, as the vast majority of Americans are, it is unfair when people that are willing to do that cannot get ahead, when those people are held back. And we've been told our whole lives that if you work hard, if you sacrifice, if you go to school and graduate, if you do all these things, that you will get ahead, that this is that kind of country. But now there are people that are starting to wonder if that's still true. Now across this country, increasingly people are starting to wonder, is that what we know as the American dream, is that still alive? They want to believe that it still is. They believe in America. But they're starting to wonder if that formula that I've outlined to you, hard work and sacrifice leads to a better life, if that formula still works. Why are they wondering that? It's not hard to understand. They are working hard. They're working harder than they ever have. Look at median incomes in America. Look at the people who feel like their lives have stagnated. You know, they are working hard, they are sacrificing. Not only are they not getting ahead, sometimes they feel like they're falling behind. Put yourself in the place of someone who's 56, 57, 58 years old, worked their whole life at some company or in some industry, suddenly they're laid off and they can't find anyone to hire them. They were getting ready for retirement, now they don't know when that's ever going to happen. Put yourself in the place of a student. So you graduated high school, you know, while your friends were out playing around, you were studying so you can get good grades and get into a good school. You did that. You went to college. While your friends were out partying, you studied. You graduated with a 3.5, 3.8, 4.0. You went to grad school, graduated that as well. You did everything that was asked of you. And then you graduate, and you can't find a job in your career field. And here's what's worse. You owe $30,000 or more in student loans. By the way, that's an issue I know. I know Senator Lee's confronted that as well. I had $100,000 in student loans when I graduated. Now, I grant you, it was a wise investment in my education, but it was an anchor around my neck for many, many years. My parents were never able to save enough money to provide for our education, so I had to do a combination of grants and work study and student loans. There were months where my student loan payments, and this was when I got in the Senate, I still had these student loans. There were months where my loan payments were higher than our mortgage. And so you look at these things and you understand what people around the country are facing. Think about the small businesses. So you're someone who used to work for someone, you were an employee, and then one day you decided, you know what, I can do this job better than my boss can. So I'm going to quit this job and I'm going to risk it. I'm going to take every penny that I have access to. I'm going to max out my credit card, I'm going to take out my life savings, and I'm going to open this small business because I believe in my idea. And I will guarantee you that for most people who did that, those first years were tough. This idea that you open up a business and tomorrow your Facebook, you know, is usually not the case. Usually you struggle those first few years. Oftentimes people fail in business two or three times before they finally succeed. Interestingly enough, as part of this process, one of the most rewarding things I've been able to do is travel the country and meet and interact with very successful people in business and in life. It's amazing how many of these people you meet, that when you ask them about how they got started and how they achieved, they usually focus on all the times they failed before they achieved. They take pride in the struggle because it means that they earned it. That they earned what they have. They take pride in that. But anyway, put yourself in the position of someone who went through all that. Someone who started this business by taking out a second mortgage on their home and literally came upon one Friday when they didn't know how they were going to make payroll or stay open, but somehow they persevered and made it through. And now that business is open and functioning, and yet it's struggling. And they're wondering that after all these years of hard work and sacrifice, they feel like they're slipping backwards instead of moving ahead. There's a growing sentiment in this country about these things. And let me tell you why that's so dangerous. Because what I've just described to you is what we have come to know as the American dream. You know, there's this idea among the minds of some that the American dream is a material thing. That the American dream is about how much money can you make so you can own more things. Now, that may be an element of it for some people. But the American dream is largely about being able to earn for yourself a better life. And you can only understand the American dream by viewing it from a global perspective. You see, for those of us who are born and raised in this country, who have lived here our whole lives, who don't know anything else, sometimes it's easy to take what I'm about to tell you for granted. In most countries around the world, for almost all of human history, and even today, It doesn't really matter how hard you're willing to work and how much you're willing to sacrifice. If you don't come from the right family, if you're not well connected, you don't get into the right schools, and you don't get into the right jobs. Put yourself in that position for a moment. Imagine now if you have big hopes, big dreams, and big talent, and your hope is to do something with it. By the way, it doesn't mean necessarily making a lot of money. Maybe you want to serve in philanthropy. Maybe you want to make a difference setting up a foundation. Maybe you're an artist or a musician, whatever it may be. Imagine now being trapped with all that talent and unable to put it into use. You would say that's unfair. And I would tell you that was the human condition up until 200 years ago, everywhere in the world, and it's still the human condition in many parts of the globe today. The American dream is that here that's not true. Here we believe that is wrong. Here we believe that's unfair. Here we believe all Americans, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, everyone, we all believe it is unfair and it is wrong that someone should be prevented from achieving a better life because of where they come from, who they come from, or where they started out in life. We believe that's unfair. We believe that's wrong. That is the American dream's essence. The notion that you should be able to achieve whatever you were meant to be able to fully utilize your talents and whatever you find meaningful, the ability to have a career instead of a job, all these sorts of things. And that's what we're on the verge of losing in the minds of many Americans, and that is supremely dangerous to the country. Why? Because I personally do not believe that there can be an America as we know it without the American dream. Without the American dream, America is just another big, powerful country, but it no longer an exceptional one. That's what's at stake in all these debates that we're conducting here in this body. What are the impediments? What's it that's creating these problems that we're facing? I've identified three, that maybe more, but I've identified three that I hope we'll focus more on. The first, by the way, is societal breakdown. It's real. This idea that somehow you can separate the social well-being of your people from their moral well-being is absurd. The social well-being from their economic well-being, the idea that you could separate those things, that's absurd. If you're born into a broken family, the statistics tell us that the chances that you're going to struggle significantly increase. The destruction of the family structure in America, the decline of it, is a leading contributor to poverty and educational underperformance. Now, the question for policymakers here in Washington is, what can we do about that? Can we pass laws that make people better parents? Can we pass government programs that make people better families or make families better? The answer is usually not. But I can tell you what we can start doing. We can start recognizing that this is a real factor, that this is not about moralizing, this is not about imposing our religious views or our values on anyone. This is a free country. You have the right to believe in anything you want. You have the right to believe in nothing at all. But you better believe this. It doesn't matter how many diplomas you have on the wall. If you don't have the values of hard work and sacrifice and respect and perseverance and self-discipline, if you don't have those values, you're going to struggle to succeed. And no one is born with those values. No one. Those values have to be taught. And they have to be reinforced. And one of the things that made America exceptional, one of the things that allowed the American dream to happen, is that in this country we had strong families and strong institutions in our society that helped those families instill those values in children. Today, there are millions of children growing up in this country that are not being taught these values because of societal breakdown. We refuse to confront it at our own peril. We better recognize it. We better start acting on it as a nation. Because I'm telling you, children that are born into broken families, living in substandard housing, in dangerous neighborhood, with no access to health care, with difficulty accessing good schools, these kids have 5 strikes against them. They are going to struggle to make it unless someone addresses that. And we are losing an entire generation of talent because of it. We better address it in a way that's good for the country and also good for those families. The second issue I would tell you that's contributing to this is we have a significant skills gap in America. What that means is 21st century jobs require more skills than jobs ever have. Here's a graphic example. Go to the grocery store. I was there on Saturday. There used to be 12 checkout lines, and that meant 12 cashiers, right? 12 cashier jobs. Now there were 8 checkout lines, and the other 4 were these machines where you just run the bar over the scan. That means those 4 or 5 cashier jobs are gone, right? Yes, but those jobs have been replaced by the job of the people that install those machines, the jobs of the people who build those machines, the job of the people who maintain those machines. A graphic example of the 21st century. The job has been replaced by a different job, but the new job, to be a cashier, you just have to be trained on the site. My mom was a cashier. But to fix, maintain, and build those machines, you need a higher level of skill that you have to learn in school somewhere. Too many of our people don't have those skills. We've got to fix that. For the life of me, I don't understand why we stigmatize career education in America. There are kids that don't want to go to Harvard or Yale. They don't want to go to a 6-year degree or 7-year degree program. They want to fix airplane engines. They want to be electricians and plumbers. Those are good paying jobs. We need electricians and plumbers and people to fix airplane engines. We should be teaching kids to do that while they're still in high school so they can graduate with a diploma in this hand and a certification that makes them job ready in the other. We should do that. Beyond it, our students today, many of them are non-traditional students. They're not just 18, 19-year-olds that just graduated from high school. They're, for example, a single mom who's working as a receptionist at a dental clinic somewhere, and she's the first one to get laid off every time things goes wrong. How can she improve her life? By becoming an ultrasound tech, or by becoming any of these other paraprofessions that you find in medicine. But to do that, she's got to be able to go to school. How's she going to do that if she has to work full-time and raise her kids? We have to answer that. Whether it's online programs or flexibility in study or programs that give you credit for life experience and work experience, we have to answer that. We have to also address workers that are in the middle of their lives, have lost their jobs, a job that's never coming back. They need to be retrained. And by the way, the traditional college route will still be the ticket to upward mobility for millions of Americans. But we better figure out how to pay it. Because right now you have kids graduating with $30,000 and $40,000 around their neck. And that's going to prevent them from starting a family, buying a house, and moving ahead. We had better address it. We had better figure out why it is that every time more aid is made available to these students, it gets gobbled up by tuition increases. We better address that problem. We better address the skills gap. But here's the third, and it goes right to the heart of what Senator Cruz from Texas is dealing with here. The free enterprise system is the single greatest eradicator of poverty in all of human history. Free enterprise, American-style free enterprise, has eradicated more poverty than all the government programs in the world combined. You want to wage a real war on poverty? Encourage free enterprise. Why? Because free enterprise is an economic system that rewards people for hard work, sacrifice, and merit. Free enterprise doesn't ask, what did your parents do for a living? Who do you know? Where do you summer? Who do you hang out with over the summer? What clubs do you belong to? Free enterprise doesn't ask that. Free enterprise wants to know, what's your idea? Is there a market for it? Are you willing to work hard and sacrifice and persevere? Because if you are, there's no guarantee, but if you are, you're going to have the real opportunity to make it. You want to know proof that that works? I've got 200 and some odd years of American history to show you. It works. In fact, it works so well that other countries are trying to copy it in their own version. Why are there millions of people in China today that just a generation ago lived in deep poverty and now are consumers in the middle class? Why? Is it because they headed even more in the direction of communism, or is it because they've opened up their economy to free enterprise principles? The same is true in Brazil, Mexico, India, all over the world. What are the countries that are finding increased prosperity and growth in the middle class doing? They're inching towards free enterprise, not away from it. Now, does that mean there's no role for government? No. Of course there's a role for government. There's an important role for government. It provides for our national security. It's hard to grow your economy when you're under attack. It provides for internal security. It's hard for people to invest in an economy if they don't know there's a court system that's going to enforce property rights, if they believe that crimes are going to go unpunished. Beyond that, we believe in a safety net. Free enterprise doesn't work without a real safety net, not as a way of life. The safety net is not a way of life. You can't live your whole life on welfare and food stamps and disability unless you're truly disabled. And that's what the real safety net is there for. It's there to help people who cannot help themselves. And it's there to help people who have fallen to stand back up and try again. We believe in the safety net, not as a way of life, but as a backstop to make people feel the confidence that they can invest in the future. What else should government be doing? As I've talked about, national security, infrastructure, the roads and bridges that we build in this country. It's not a jobs program, but it does create the backbone for the economy to function. The problem is, the most important thing that government should do in all of our policy-making decisions is we must ask ourselves, before you do anything, you pass a law, you create a new program, ask yourself, will this foster the free enterprise system, or will it undermine it? And to answer that question, you have to first recognize how the free enterprise system works. What creates prosperity and opportunity? Here's what creates it. When someone invents something new, a new product, a new idea, a new service, when someone starts a new business, or when someone grows an existing business. That's what creates opportunity and middle-class prosperity in the free enterprise system. That's what makes upward mobility possible. That's what allows people to climb out of where they started in life and improve it and leave their kids even better off. When people innovate, when they invest by starting a new business or expanding an existing one. So as policymakers, every time we make a decision around here, if you really want to help the middle class, if you really want to help the people who are trying to make it, make America the best place in the world to innovate, to start a new business, or to expand an existing business. And you want to know what's wrong in America today with our economy? Look no further than a series of government policies, by the way, pursued by both political parties. Although my opinion is I haven't seen anything like the last 6 years. But a series of policies that have undermined the free enterprise system. Policies that make it harder, not easier, to start a business, to expand an existing business, and to innovate. And chief among them right now before us is what the senator from Texas is talking about all night: Obamacare. That's why we're passionate about this. You know, if you watch the news a little bit, you would think this is all because it's President Obama's idea, and the Republicans are against it because his idea, and that's what's happening here. That's absurd. That's absurd. I certainly have an ideological objection to the expansion of government. But my passionate objection is that, at least the reason why I'm on the floor here today, and the reason why I know Senator Cruz is on the floor here all night, is not because of ideology or theory. It's the reality that this law is going to hurt real people. It's going to hurt real people. I've met those people. I've talked to those people. If you've been to a Walgreens lately, you know those people too. Why? Because Walgreens has announced that because of Obamacare, it has to get rid of its insurance program that its employees are generally happy with. That's why they're still working there, right? Now they get thrown into the great unknown. And here's the problem with that. Imagine if you're chronically ill, or imagine if you have children and you have this pre-existing relationship with a doctor. They know your history. You can call them when you need them. They're responsive. That's why you've been going to them all these years. Now you get thrown into this new insurance program. That doctor isn't on the plan anymore. In fact, what we're hearing from these new exchanges that are being set up, is one of the ways that we're going to lower costs is we're going to limit our networks. Less doctors, less hospitals. That's how we're going to save some money and make these things affordable. And that's what we're going to put people into? So all of a sudden, this doctor you've been going to all these years, you can't go to them anymore? That's wrong. That's hurting real people. How about this for an example? Imagine now these small businesses that I've met. I know you've talked about this, Senator Cruz. I met a restaurant owner. We had a small business committee meeting here a couple months ago. Small business owner from Louisiana. He testified. He's got great ideas. He has calculated that there is a market for him to open a new restaurant. He owns a chain. He wants to open one more. He's not going to, because of Obamacare. Because the costs create uncertainty about the future for him. Because he's worried about triggering mandates he can't calculate for. Now you may say, well, you know what? He's a business owner. He already has X number of restaurants. Why does he need any more? Some people would actually say that. It's not him necessarily we're worried about the most. He would be the first one to tell you, I'm going to be okay. Who's not going to be okay? Well, if he opened that new restaurant, he's going to hire 20 or 30 new people. There are 20 or 30 people in Louisiana right now who could have had a job that could have helped them to provide for their family, a job that could have helped them to pay for their school. Those jobs aren't going to be created. That's just one example. There are multiple examples. How about this one? How about if you're a part-time worker now? And look, the backbone of our economy can never be part-time work, but there's always a place for part-time work. I worked part-time before. I think the senator's talked about it. He had to work part-time as well. Others have. There's a place for that in our economy. Primarily, it helps young people and retirees. And for young people, it helps them to work their way through school. So imagine now if you want to work your way through school because you don't want to owe $50,000 in student loans. And so you're in Central Florida and you work for SeaWorld. And right now, maybe you're working 32 hours a week part-time and using the rest of the time to go to school. But here comes Obamacare. And so now SeaWorld has announced, instead of 32 hours, we're going to move you to 28 hours. That's real money. That is real money. That's hurting real people. Here's one that doesn't get a lot of attention. Medicare Advantage is a great choice program. It's not perfect. There are ways to improve it, but it's good. It's a program on Medicare that basically allows patients on Medicare to sign up in a managed care system that manages their care, but for that, it adds additional benefits to their package. My mom is a Medicare Advantage patient. I can tell you the outcomes are generally better than people that are in the fee-for-service system, and the services they offer are valuable. In my mom's case, she needs transportation to and from doctor's visits. That's one of the services the Medicare Advantage program provides. Obamacare takes money out of Medicare Advantage. They don't like it, so they took money out of it. You would think they're taking money out of Medicare Advantage to shore up the finances of Medicare because it's going bankrupt. No. They're taking the money out to fund Obamacare. So what's going to happen practically is at some point here over the next few months, beneficiaries on Medicare Advantage are going to get letters in the mail. And that letter is going to inform them of services they were once receiving and are no longer receiving. The point is that all the uncertainty created by this health care law, by Obamacare, is it making America the easiest place or an easier place to start a business? No. Does Obamacare make it easier to grow an existing business? Absolutely not. Does Obamacare encourage innovation in the marketplace? Of course not. On the contrary, it undermines innovation in medicine. It undermines innovation in medicine, advances in medical technology that have added years and quality to the lives of millions of people. It undermines that. This thing is a complete disaster. And now we're being asked to take the taxpayer dollars and pour more money into this broken thing? Of course we're passionate about being against that. So I go out across the state of Florida. Everywhere I go, I have people that voted for the president telling me that this thing is hurting them. This is not a partisan thing. There are Democrats being hurt by this. There are supporters of the president being hurt by this. Earlier this evening, I lost track of when it was, Senator Cruz read letters from the Teamsters Union, from other unions across the country. We received news that the union representing IRS workers who are in charge of enforcing this law through the fines or the tax, whatever they decided to call it, they want to be exempted from it. They don't want it to apply to them. By the way, all of this, all these exemptions that people are begging for, whether it's members of Congress or IRS employees or unions, let me tell you what that is. That is a shining a light on this reality. Big government always benefits the people who have access to power. Everywhere in the world, that's true. Why? I'll tell you why. Big government always writes a lot of regulations, a lot of rules, a lot of complexity. So if you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation, if you're a powerful labor union, if you're a rich billionaire, you can come and hire the best lawyers in America, and they will help you figure out the loopholes in those laws. Let me tell you what else you can do. You can hire the best lobbyists in Washington to help you get those loopholes written in. Don't be shocked to learn, you may not be shocked to know this, but in politics, sometimes businesses use government regulations and laws to give them an edge over their competitors, to keep other people from coming into their industry and competing against them. Guys, it happens. It happens because in big government, that's possible. Big government always helps the people who have access to power because they're the only ones that can afford to navigate it. So if you're a major corporation, if you're a major labor union, you can either deal with the impacts of Obamacare or you can work to get an exemption, a waiver, or what have you from it. Who can't? I'll tell you who can't. The person trying to start a business out of the spare bedroom of their home. Someone who's decided, you know, my business, I met someone like this, by the way. I think it wasn't a Starbucks, it was at a Dunkin' Donuts, and they were using the free Wi-Fi, and that was their business, this little corner table at the Dunkin' Donuts. That's where they were starting out the software business that they were doing, accessing the free Wi-Fi to do it. You think they can comply with complicated rules and regulations? They can't. What it does is it forces people to either go underground in their operations or not do it at all. It's not just an example of why Obamacare fails, it's an example of why big government fails. And it's not fair. It's not fair that for people in this country who are willing to work hard and are willing to sacrifice, it's not fair that we're making it harder on them through the government policies being pursued here. By the way, Obamacare is not the only one. We have a broken tax code. If I asked you, please design for me a tax code that discourages people from investing money and growing their businesses, you would give me the U.S. tax code today. We've got to fix that. Our regulations are completely out of control. There's no cost-benefit analysis at all. These people write regulations here in Washington. No one ever asked the question, how many jobs will this destroy? How many jobs won't be created because of this? No one asked that question. They measure the theory behind what it might do, the environmental benefit, the societal benefit. No one ever does the cost-benefit analysis. There's no employment impact statement attached to these laws. Think about the absurdity of that. Here we are with huge unemployment, a huge number of people dropping out of the search for jobs, a huge amount of underemployment, a vast majority of the jobs, new jobs being created being part-time, and we're passing regulations that makes it even harder to create jobs and opportunity for people. It's crazy. Regulations are out of control. The debt, we're going to deal with the debt here in about, 6 or 7 days. The debt limit debate's going to come up. They just want to raise the thing again. Listen, as the president said, I'm not negotiating on this. Let's just raise it again. Never mind the fact that he stood on the very floor of this Senate less than 10 years ago and said that raising the debt limit back then was a leadership failure of leadership. Now, of course, things have changed because a $17 trillion debt is no longer as pressing in his mind. And that's problematic. Why? Is the debt just an accounting problem? That's how we talk about it, you know. You turn on the news, they talk about the debt as just an accounting problem. Oh, they just, spend more money than they take in, but if they only raised more taxes on richer people, they would pay the whole thing off. That's not true, guys. It's not true. If you took every penny away from people that made over $1 million this year, it doesn't even make a dent in this. When any politician that goes to you and says, all we got to do is raise taxes and the debt is under control, is lying to you. Period. Here's the hard truth about the debt. And the sooner we confront it, the better off we're going to be as a people. The debt is growing because we have important government programs that are structured in a way that are not sustainable. They spend a lot more money than they take in, and it only gets worse from here. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, those are important programs. My mom is on 2 of them. I would never do anything to hurt her benefits or people like her. And that's why I'm so passionate about reforming them. Because those programs are going bankrupt. And we are going to have to deal with it. You cannot continue to spend $1 trillion more than you take in every year and not deal with it. The problem is the longer we wait to deal with it, the harder it's going to be to deal with it. It's no different than medical conditions, right? Think about this for a second. Is there any disease or any medical condition that you know of that's easier to treat the later you catch it? Is there? Is there any medical condition that's easier to fix the longer you wait to deal with it? Of course not. What are doctors always talking to us about? Early detection. It's the same with the debt. The longer we wait to address this issue, the harder and more disruptive it's going to be to solve it. And that's what's driving our debt. People want to focus on other things, foreign aid, cut foreign aid. Foreign aid is less than 1% of our budget. That's not what's driving our debt. It's not even defense spending. Is there ways to save money in defense contracting? Of course there is. But that's not the driver of our debt. The driver of our debt are these unsustainable programs that if we want to save, we must fix. The debt is not an accounting problem. Why? Why is the debt, what's the debt doing to, first of all, it's a moral problem, right? Never in the history of this country has a generation of Americans said to their kids, guys, we're going to run up your tab and you figure out how to pay for it later. We've never had that happen in the history of the United States, ever. But that's what they're doing. It's wrong. But it's more than that. This is not just about how high taxes are going to be 50 years from now on our kids. This is about the jobs that are being destroyed right now. Because let's go back to the simple equation of how jobs are created. Jobs are created when someone invents something, or jobs are created when someone starts a new business or expands an existing business. And people who look at this debt and say, boy, they're going to have to deal with that debt one day through a debt crisis. They're going to have to raise taxes. They're going to have to make disruptive changes in government in the future. They're not encouraged about investing in the future now because they're fearful of the uncertainty provided by the debt. They're fearful. So there are jobs right now that are not being created. Right now, there are jobs right now in America that do not exist, that weren't created, were going to be created, but were not created because of the national debt. And we're going to have a debate here in a few days about it. And the attitude from a lot of people around here is, of course, we've got to raise the debt limit, and we shouldn't do anything about it. So, guys, come on. I stood on the floor of the Senate, and my chair was right back there, 2011. And I said, when are we going to finally deal with this thing? Well, 2 years later, we're still not dealing with this thing, 2.5 years later. This complacency, this lack of urgency about these issues is puzzling. You know what my fear is? My fear is you fast forward in 50 years in the future, historians are going to write, the country was falling apart, they were destroying the free enterprise system, the American dream was crumbling, and these guys just stood by and did nothing. That's how I feel what's happening right now. It feels like those horror movies, you know, where you keep screaming at the screen, don't go in that room, don't do it, but they do it anyway. In some ways, everything that we're facing here with the debt, with ObamaCare, is like a horror movie. You know how this ends up if we stay on this path. You know what happens in the horror movie if they open that door? The bad guy's right on the other side. It's the same thing with these issues we're facing. We know what happens if we continue on the path we're on right now. We decline as a nation. The sad part is that doesn't have to happen. There is no reason why the 21st century can't also be an American century. There's no reason why the next generation of Americans can't be the most prosperous people that ever lived. But it requires us to act. It requires us to reform our tax code, not as a way of raising taxes, not as a way of creating new taxes, but as a way of creating new taxpayers through economic growth. It requires us to deal with regulations. By the way, and I think the senator from Texas would agree with this, Obamacare, as much as anything else, is a massive authorization to write a bunch of rules. It's not just a law, it's a bunch of regulations that are hurting job creation, that are discouraging investment, that are discouraging people from starting a new business or expanding an existing business. We have to fix that, and we have to deal with the debt. All these issues have to be dealt with. None of them get easier to fix as time goes on. They all get harder and more disruptive. Which leads me, I guess, to, I don't know how you've done this for 18 hours. I'm already tired, but why, at the end of the day, I guess I'll just speak personally. The one issue that really makes me so passionate about all of this and its sum total, I often wonder, you know, what would my life have been like if America had never existed? What if in 1956 there wasn't a place my parents could go to where people like them had a chance for a better life? I doubt very seriously whether I would be standing on the floor of the Cuban Senate. There isn't one now, but I can't imagine what my life would be like if America had never existed. If God had not given my parents the opportunity to come to the one place on earth where people like them, born into poverty and little formal education, actually had a chance to build a better life. And I think about the millions of people out there now that are trying to do what my parents did. what Senator Cruz's father did and his parents did, but so many of our parents did, by the way. The great thing about this country is when you tell your story, everybody has one just like it. We're all the descendants of go-getters. Every single one of us is the descendant of someone who overcame extraordinary obstacles to claim their stake on the American dream. They overcame discrimination or poverty, in many cases, this evil institution of slavery. This is who we are as a people. We're all the descendants of go-getters. And I think about how that's changed the world. There is literally no corner of this planet that you can't go to where you won't find people that feel frustrated and trapped. And I can't tell you how many times I meet people from abroad who disagree with all sorts of things that America does, and yet they have this begrudging admiration for it. You know what that admiration is rooted in? That someone just like them who came from where they come from in this country is doing extraordinary things. Things they never could have dreamt of in the nation of their own birth. And I think we should all ask ourselves, what would the world look like if America was not exceptional? What if America was just another one of the rich countries in the world with a big military and some power, but it wasn't special? What would the world be like? And the answer is the world would be more dangerous and less free and less prosperous. And so when we debate the future of our country, in many ways we're debating the future of the world. Because if America declines, I want you to ask yourself this: who replaces us? The United Nations replaces us? Really? Who replaces us? China? China doesn't even care about the rights of their own people. Why would they care about the rights of people anywhere else? Who replaces us? Russia? Who replaces us on the world stage? If America declines, who will inspire people around the world to seek not just freedom, but economic opportunity? Who will stand as proof that it is a lie when you tell people that people like them can't achieve? Who will stand as an example that that's not true if America declines? And you know how the one thing that will lead quickest to America's decline? It's not simply the debt, it's not simply taxes, it's not simply these unconstitutional violations we see on a daily basis. The quickest way to decline is to undermine the American dream. To lose our identity as the one place on earth where anyone from anywhere can accomplish anything. That's the fast track to decline. And that's why we're so passionate about Obamacare. It is a direct threat to the American dream. Here, the irony of it is that Obamacare was sold as a way to help the people who are trying to make it. How was it sold to people? Here's how it was sold to people. If you're working class, if you're poor, and you can't afford health insurance, the government's now going to provide you health insurance. Tell me the truth. That's what a lot of people really perceive this to be. They don't have insurance now. This was going to allow you to now have insurance, maybe for free, if not at a very low cost. And by the way, anyone who already had insurance, this wasn't going to hurt you at all. That's how it was sold. That's how it was sold to people. This is going to be cheap, easy to get insurance for people who are struggling. And so I understand why someone who is struggling to make it would look at that as something that's appealing. Guess what? That's not what it is. People who have existing health insurance right now, guess what? Many of you are going to lose it. When they told you that if you had what you could keep what you had, they were not telling you the truth. People who are told that this is going to provide them access to cheap and quality health insurance, guess what? I can't tell you what you're going to get because it doesn't exist yet. But theoretically, on October 1st, people are going to have a chance to sign up for one of these exchanges. And here's what I predict you're going to find. Less choices, a higher price than you anticipated, perhaps that you can afford, and less choices in doctors and hospitals that are included in those exchanges. This is a disaster all the way around. And by the way, while these exchanges are being set up, you may also be getting a notice from your employer that they're going to reduce your hours and maybe even your job. So that's why this is a fight worth having. And it's interesting, you haven't had a chance to see it, Senator Cruz, because you've been here. But it's interesting how the news covers all this. Political reporters, and they have a job to do, they always cover this through the political angle. You know, who's going to win, who's going to lose? Is this a college football game? You know, who's the winner, who's the loser on the scoreboard and all that kind of thing. They love the process of it. There's a place for that. I mean, you wouldn't be shocked to know there's politics around here. This issue's so much deeper than that, though. It really is. And there's not a lot of attention being paid to that. And I think we should, because it's having an impact on real people in a real and powerful way. All this attention being paid, if you watch the news among the political classes, the process. When are they going to vote? Who's going to win the vote? Who's going to vote which way? That's fine, guys. I understand that's part of this process, and we all enjoy watching it from time to time, right? What they're missing is the why. Why is someone willing to stay up all night, two people willing to stay basically up all night to speak about this? Why are people willing to fight on this issue? Why are so many Americans against it? The why. No one's asking the why. And the answer is because it's undermining the opportunity for upward mobility. That's why. We're not fighting here against the president. We are fighting for people. For people that voted for us and people that will never vote for us. For people that voted for Mitt Romney and people that voted for Barack Obama. For real people. People who may never agree with us on any other issues, but they're going to be hurt by Obamacare. People who, as we speak here, are about to wake up, get their kids ready to go to school, put in 8 to 10 hours at work, come back home, try to make dinner while they make sure their kids are doing homework, put them to bed. By the time all that ends, they're exhausted. And then they got to get up tomorrow and do it all over again. And then the next day, and then the next day, and then next week again. And the last thing these people need is another disruption in their life. The last thing these people need is to go to work tomorrow and be informed, I'm sorry, but we're cutting 4 hours out of your work week. I'm sorry, but we're changing your insurance plan. So that doctor you've been taking your asthmatic child to, or that doctor you've been going to in your pregnancy, you're not going to be able to see them anymore. Because this new insurance plan, they're not covered in it. That's the last thing people need. And that's what they're going to get. That is wrong. It is unfair. I'll close with this. I alluded to it earlier. I hope we will do everything we can to keep America special. To keep it the shining city on a hill, as Reagan called it. Because as I outlined earlier, I think that the future of the world depends on it. The kind of world our children will inherit depends on it. And I think it's important to remind us that America's faced difficult circumstances before. In fact, every generation of American has faced some challenge to what makes us exceptional and special. Every single one. They were different, but they were challenges. This country had a civil war that deeply divided it. This country lived through a Great Depression. This country lived through 2 very, very painful world wars. This country had to confront its history of segregation and discrimination and overcome that. It had a very conflictive conflict in Vietnam that divided Americans against each other. In the midst of all that, it had to wage a Cold War against the expansion of communism. We forget, but there were many commentators in the late 70s and early 80s that would tell Reagan, why don't you just accept the fact? Not just Reagan, but anybody. We got to accept the fact that Soviet expansion is here to stay. That was a real threat. Again, it's easy to forget that. But that was the way the world was just 25 years ago. Every generation of American has had to face challenges and confront them. And every generation has. Not only have they solved their problems, every generation has left the next better off. Every single one. And now it's our turn. We have a very important choice to make. And it's a pretty dramatic one. We will either be the first generation of Americans to leave our children worse off, or our children will be the most prosperous Americans that have ever lived. It's one or the other. There's no middle ground in my mind on that. And when we debate the future of this health care law and Obamacare, we're debating that question. You know, I'm reminded, the story of the Star-Spangled Banner and how it was written. I was reminded of it this morning. So during the attack on the fort, it was hard to imagine that after that bombardment, the U.S. could survive. After that bombardment, the notion was there's no way they're going to make it through the night. But that next morning, when the Star-Spangled Banner, when that flag was hoisted, when it was raised, It was a signal to the British and the world that the U.S., that this idea of freedom and liberty had survived. And it's interesting how time and again that idea has been tested, both in external and internal conflict. And you may not realize this, but when the Senate is in session, the flag is up. So usually I'm walking in early in the morning to the Capitol, there's no flag up at 5 in the morning, right? Because there's nobody in session. So I didn't have my TV on this morning, but I was walking into the Capitol and I looked over and the flag was up. I said, my goodness, these guys are still talking. And I'm glad they are. Because what's at stake is the future of our country. Economically, in ways just as dramatic as those challenges we faced at the inception of the Republic. Because this debate is not just about whether a program named after the president will stay in law. This debate is about a program that undermines the American dream, about the one thing that makes us special and different from the rest of the world. And if there's anything worth fighting for, I would think that is. If there's anything worth fighting for, I would think the American dream is worth fighting for. I think remaining exceptional is worth fighting for. I think after its history of poverty eradication, the free enterprise system is worth fighting for. I think as someone who has directly benefited from the free enterprise system, I personally have an obligation to fight for it. And I hope we will all fight for it, not just on this issue, but in the debate to come next week. And this is what this is all about. And so I'd close by asking the senator from Texas, as I highlight all these challenges that we face, is this issue really not at the end of the day about us fighting on behalf of everyday people who have no voice in this process, who can't afford to hire a lobbyist to get them a waiver, who can't afford to hire an accounting firm or a lawyer to help them navigate all this complexity? At the end of the day, the big companies, the really rich people in America, they're going to figure this out. They may not like it, but they can deal with it. And they shouldn't have to, but they can. But the people who are fighting for are the people that cannot afford to navigate all this. Isn't this what this is all about?
I thank the senator from Florida for his inspired comments and his excellent question. And that's absolutely right. This fight is about whether hardworking American people get the same exceptions, the same benefit that President Obama has given big corporations and members of Congress. And I want to note, in response to the inspirational remarks by Senator Rubio, I want to make 5 comments, the last 2 of which I think it may well be likely that Senator Rubio will be inspired to ask a question in response to. The first point is a very brief one, which is simply thank you. I would thank the senator from Florida for telling that story about the flag. I will confess, as we sit here a few minutes before 7 a.m., I'm a little bit tired. Senator Mike Lee's a little bit tired. And I'll tell you, the image of the dust clearing, the smoke clearing, and seeing the Star-Spangled Banner waving while the rockets red glare, that inspired and encouraged me, and I appreciate your sharing it. That was very kind of you to tell that story, and it is very meaningful, so thank you. Secondly, Senator Rubio talked about how the political reporters have been focusing predominantly on the game, on the political process. He's right. I haven't seen any of the news coverage. We've been here on the Senate floor, so I don't know what the coverage is. Now, that doesn't surprise me, what he reports, because that is the nature of political reporting in Washington. So I'm going to make a request directly to those reporters who are covering this proceeding, those reporters who are reporting on this proceeding, to endeavor to have at least half of what you say be focused on the actual substance of this debate, on the fact that Obamacare is a train wreck that is killing jobs, that is forcing more and more Americans into part-time work, that is driving up their health insurance premiums, that is causing more and more Americans who are struggling to lose their health insurance. Now, my real request would make all of your coverage be on that, but I know that's too much to ask. But I'm going to suggest if all of your coverage or most of your coverage is on the political process, on this personality or that personality, on who's up or who's down, or how this impacts the 2042 presidential election, I'm going to suggest two things. Number one, that's not doing the job that you have stepped forward to serve and do. Look, all of us have a job. Those of us in this body elected to serve have a job to listen to the people and to fight for the men and women of America. But those of you who serve in the media have a job to report to the men and women in America what's happening, and not just on the political game. But secondly, I want to say, if you just report on the personalities and political game, you are taking sides in this issue. Why is that? Because those who want to keep Obamacare funded, those who want on Friday or Saturday when cloture comes up for a vote, for members of this body to vote for cloture, to give Harry Reid the ability to defund Obamacare with 51 partisan Democrat votes. They want all of the coverage to be about the personality, about the politics, about anything other than the substance. So if you choose to cover just the personality and the politics, you're doing exactly what some partisans in this body would like. And that's, I'm going to suggest, not responsible reporting. I know each of you wants to be a responsible steward of informing the public, and it would strike me that the debate we have had here impacts people's lives in a way that nobody gives a flip about the politicians involved. A third observation about Senator Rubio's question. When he compared Obamacare to a horror film, I enjoyed that comparison. In fact, in my mind, I heard the music from The Shining, or not The Shining, from Psycho, in the shower scene. And it occurred to me that perhaps one of the great philosophical conundrums with which we must all wrestle is whether Obamacare is more like Jason or Freddie. Now, that indeed is a difficult question. You could make a powerful argument for Jason, because Obamacare is the biggest job killer in this country, and when Jason put on his hockey mask and swung that machete, boy, there was carnage like nothing else. But on the other hand, you could make a powerful argument for Freddie, because as James Hoffa, the president of the Teamsters, said, Obamacare is a nightmare. It's a nightmare for the men and women of America. While the Senate slept, men and women of America didn't get a respite from the nightmare that is causing them to lose their jobs, never to get hired, causing them to be forcibly reduced to 29 hours a week, driving up their health insurance premiums, and jeopardizing their health care. The only way they get a respite from that nightmare, the only way we stop, there was a movie, Jason versus Freddie. I forget, they fought each other. I forget even what happened in that movie. But the only way we stop Jason and/or Freddie is if the American people rise up in such overwhelming numbers that the members of this Senate listen to the people, and we step forward and avert this train wreck. We step forward and avert this nightmare. So those are three observations that I wanted to make at the outset. And then I want to make two more. And I would note, Mr. President, as you know well, the rules of the Senate are curious at times. While I am speaking, I'm not allowed to pose a question to another. I'm allowed to answer questions, but not to pose a question to another senator. But there's no prohibition in my asking a rhetorical question to the body, which may in turn prompt Senator Rubio to ask a question of his own and to comment perhaps on the rhetorical question that I might raise. So the rhetorical question that I would raise to the body, and I've got two I want to ask, but I want to start to the body thinking about Senator Rubio's family story. And listen, I am inspired by Senator Rubio's story every time I hear it. I'm inspired. Part of it is because his family, like mine, we share many things in common. His parents, like my father, fled Cuba. His father was a bartender. My dad washed dishes. His mother, I believe, cleaned hotel rooms, if I remember correctly. My mother was a sales clerk at Foley's department store. The question I would ask the chamber is, what would have happened if, when Senator Rubio's parents came from Cuba, when they arrived here, if Obamacare had been the law of the land? What would have happened to his father and mother as they sought that job as a bartender, cleaning hotel rooms? If we had an economy with stagnant growth where jobs weren't available and they weren't able to get hired? What would have happened if they'd been lucky enough to get that job and their hours had been reduced forcibly to 29 hours a week against their wishes? What would have happened if they had faced the economic calamity for working men and women, for those struggling? That is Obamacare, and I wonder, I've thought many times about what would have happened to my parents, and I know it would have been catastrophic in our family, but I wonder how it would have impacted the Rubio family if Obamacare had been the law when Senator Rubio's parents came to this country seeking the American dream. Would it have benefited them, or would it have harmed them?
Would the senator from Texas yield for a question without yielding the floor?
I am happy to yield for a question without yielding the floor.
I heard the rhetorical question you posed to the body, and it involved a direct question about how my family would have confronted those challenges. And so let me back up and talk about that for a second, because while it is my family, and I always refer to, because I think we should all, the reason why I got in politics and my view of the issues of the day are all framed through my upbringing, and as all of ours are. You can't escape where you come from or what you're raised around. It influences the way you view the world and the way you view issues. And the experience that my parents had has influenced me. I earlier talked about the student loans I once had. I paid them off last year, by the way, with the proceeds of a book, which is available now in paperback in case anyone's curious. But anyway, all joking aside, when I wrote that book, it required me to go back and learn a lot more detail about my parents. Because like anybody else, you grow up, you listen to your parents talk, you kind of repeat it to other people, but when you're growing up and you're in a hurry, you don't always have time to sit down and listen to the details. This actually forced me to go back and learn details about their lives. And what ended up happening is I ended up meeting and discovering two people that I never knew. I mean, I knew something about them, I'd grown up with them, but I knew my parents in their 40s and 50s. I didn't know them in their teens and 20s and 30s. You know, sometimes when you're young, you forget your parents used to be young too. Sometimes you forget that when they were your age, they had their own dreams and their own hopes and their own aspirations, and they certainly did. And it reminds me, as I learned about these stories, I learned that when they came to this country, it was not an instant success. The immigrant experience rarely is. You don't just get here and a week later you're, running a very successful company or whatever. It doesn't work that way. My parents struggled. They were very discouraged those first few years. My dad bounced from temporary job to temporary job. My mom was hurt in an accident at making aluminum chairs at a factory. It cut her hand. They struggled. Those first years were tough. But they persevered, and what ended up happening was my father found a job as a bar assistant, basically, on Miami Beach. And then, eventually, through hard work, he was promoted to bartender, and then one of the top bartenders at the hotel. It wasn't going to make him rich, but it made him stable. By 1966, 10 years after they had arrived, they felt so confident in the future, they bought a home. 5 years after that, they were so confident that even though they were both over 40 years of age, they had me. And then my sister a year and a half after that. Now, you asked the question rhetorically to the chamber, and I'm going to answer it. What would it have been like if a program like this would have been in place? But it's not just a program like this. It's not just Obamacare. It's all the other things that government is doing. And to answer that question, I have to focus on why they had opportunities to begin with. So why was my dad able to raise our family working as a bartender at a hotel on Miami Beach and then in Las Vegas and then back in Miami? Because someone who had access to money risked that money to open up that hotel. That was not a government-run hotel. That hotel existed because people who had access to money, I don't know if they borrowed it, I don't know if it was their own, I'm not sure the history behind it, but someone who had access to money said, instead of leaving it in the bank or investing it in another country, I am going to risk this money and open and operate this hotel. And the result is the jobs my parents had existed. But that's just how you open a business. How does it continue? How does that business survive? It survives because Americans, after they were done paying their taxes and all their other bills, had enough money left over in their pocket to get on an airplane and fly to Miami Beach or to Las Vegas and stay 3 or 4 nights at the hotel where my parents worked at. The answer to your question is the reason why my parents were able to own a home and provide us a stable environment in which we grew up is because free enterprise works. Free enterprise works. It encouraged someone with access to money to open up those hotels, and it left enough money and prosperity in people's pockets after they paid their bills and their taxes so they could take a vacation and go to the hotels where my parents worked. Without people in those hotels, there's no job for our parents. They were able to achieve for us what they did because of free enterprise. And so to answer your question about the impact of Obamacare, anything that would undermine free enterprise would have undermined those hopes and those dreams. And Obamacare is undermining it. Now, I can't say for certain what would have happened, but here's a possibility. Obamacare could have encouraged the hotel they worked at to move employees from 40 hours to 28. Hire 2 bartenders part-time instead of 1. That would not have been good. Obamacare could have led them to hire 2 cashiers at the Crown Hotel in Miami Beach instead of 1. 2 part-timers like my mom. That would not have been good. Even beyond that, because Obamacare is cutting people's hours all over the country, because Obamacare is kept keeping people from getting hired all over the country, because Obamacare is costing people their jobs all over the country, I suspect that the number of visitors to that hotel would have been diminished. The number of people, when you lose your job, when you get moved from full-time to part-time, the next move you make is not to get on an airplane and go on vacation. The next move you make is to scramble to make up the difference. That's called personal discretionary spending, and people don't do that when they're uncertain about tomorrow, and Obamacare would have made many Americans uncertain about tomorrow. It's going to make many Americans uncertain about tomorrow. The bottom line is it would have directly and indirectly harmed my parents' aspirations for themselves and for our family. And here's what's troublesome. There are millions of people in this country today trying to do what my parents did. And if you want to find them, walk out of this building and walk 3 blocks to the nearest hotel, and you'll meet them there. They clean the hotel rooms, they serve food at the restaurants, they cater the banquets. Like my dad, they're the gentleman or the lady standing behind that little portable bar, serving drinks at the next function we speak at. They're right down the street. They're in the halls of this building. You'll meet them. They have a little vest on. You'll see them with a little cart, cleaning the bathrooms and the floors and providing an environment where we can work. These are people that are working hard to achieve a better life for themselves and oftentimes for their children. These are folks, many of whom have decided, I am going to sacrifice and work a job so that my children can have a career. I can't tell you how many of the people that work in this building that I've talked to, like the company that caters our lunches or in the cafeterias here. I can't tell you how many of them haven't said to me that the reason why they're working these jobs is because they hope one day their children can do something like stand on the floor of the Senate. That happens to be our story, Senator Cruz. That happens to be the American story, too. We forget that some of the greatest heroes in the American story are not the people who have been on the cover of magazines. Some of the greatest heroes in the American story are not people that have had movies made about them. Some of the greatest heroes in the American story are not the famous people that are on CNBC being interviewed all the time about how successful they are. They're heroes too, but that's some of the greatest heroes in the American story are people you will never learn about, whose books will never be written about, whose stories will never be told. Some of the greatest heroes in the American story are people who have worked hard at jobs, backbreaking jobs, difficult jobs, so their children can have careers. And I want you to think about what that means. Think about reaching a point in your life when you realize, you know what, for me, this is about as far as I'm going to be able to go because of age, because of circumstances. But now the purpose of my life will become making sure that all the doors that were closed for me are open for my children. Imagine that. Because that's what millions of people are living right now. It's not that they're not talented. It's not that they're not smart. It's that they're 45 or 40 or 46, and it's just, time is running out on them. But what America is going to give them a chance to do is it's going to give them a chance to open doors for their children that were closed for them. They're not going to be able to leave their children a trust fund. They're not going to be able to leave their children millions of dollars. They're not going to be able to leave their children a home even. But they're going to be able to allow their children to inherit their unfulfilled dreams and fulfill them. And there are millions of people in this country who are trying to do that right now. There are people that work in this Capitol that are trying to do that right now. There are people working within blocks of here that are trying to do that right now. And Obamacare is going to make it harder for them to do that. And it's ironic, because Obamacare was sold as a plan to help people like that. And instead, because it undermines the free enterprise system, it is hurting them. Now, many of those people who are being hurt by this may not have realized it yet. And I think the job of leadership is to explain the consequences to people. But in the end, I feel like we have an obligation to fight on their behalf. I feel like we have, especially those of us who are a generation removed from that experience, have a special obligation to fight for that. The American story is not the story of people who have made it and then say, now everyone's on their own. The American story is the story of people who have succeeded and want others to succeed as well. That, by the way, is one of the fundamental differences between the view of big government and the view of free enterprise. Big government believes that the economy can't really grow. And so what we need government to do is just divide it up among us, right? The economy is a limited thing. There's only so much money to go around. And so we need the government to step in and make sure that the money is distributed fairly. That's what we're going to use taxes for. That's the view big government has. What makes America different is we rejected that. We said that's not true. We believe in free enterprise, and free enterprise believes that the economy can always continue to grow bigger. That means if you're successful, you can stay successful. And other people can become successful as well. What makes America special is that free enterprise believes you don't have to make anybody worse off in order to make someone better off. And that's different from the rest of the world, and it works. I remember growing up, we didn't have, especially when I lived in Las Vegas, there wasn't a lot of, back then especially, there wasn't a lot of family-friendly things to do on the weekends. One of the things we used to do, my parents liked to do this, they would drive us through the nice neighborhoods with the nice houses. For some reason, I remember Liberace's house. It was in Las Vegas. I know it was one of the nice houses. They would drive us through these neighborhoods, and they would show us these wonderful houses. And when we looked at these houses, they wouldn't say to us, look at the people living in these houses. Look how much money they're making. That's unfair, right? They're making all that money, and that's why we're struggling. The reason why we live in a small house is because people like them live in big houses. They didn't teach that to us. On the contrary, you know what they used to say to us? Look what these people accomplished through hard work and sacrifice. That can be you, if that's what you want. Look what these people were able to do. That can be you. And that's the difference in some ways between us and the rest of the world. We've never been a place of class envy and class warfare. We've always pointed to these stories as an example of what you can do as well. We celebrate success in America. It inspires us because we know it's not a zero-sum game. We know that you can be successful and I can be successful. We know that you can have a successful business and I can have a successful business. We know that in order for me to be more prosperous, I don't have to make anyone less prosperous. That is a big deal, because that is not the way the world has functioned for most of its history. For most of its history, governments didn't view it that way, and peoples didn't view it that way. They always viewed that there had to be a winner and there had to be a loser. One of the things that made us really unique is that we never viewed it that way. In America, we've always viewed it as, you can be a winner and I can be a winner. We can both benefit from each other. Because, by the way, that's how free enterprise works. In free enterprise, you need your customers to be well off. You need your customers to be doing well economically. You can't afford to bankrupt people by raising your prices because then they can't buy stuff from you. And it's all interrelated. You know, last year during the campaign, there was this big debate about job creators. Every American is a job creator, whether you realize it or not. Every time you go shopping at a department store, you're a job creator. Every time you order something on the internet, you're a job creator. Every time you spend money into our economy, you are a job creator. Now, some people open a business, but every American is a job creator because in free enterprise, the better off you are, the better off we are. And we can all be better off. And that's not the direction that politics is headed. And by the way, that is one of the things that they're trying to influence this debate on Obamacare about. They're trying to argue that this is an effort to deny people something. Not true. This is an effort to protect people from something. Especially people that are vulnerable to this. Because I repeat, I'm telling you, I've talked to a lot of successful people, people that are making a lot of money or have made a lot of money. They don't like Obamacare, but they are going to be fine with it. They're going to deal with it, guys. They can afford to deal with it. They don't like it. They're going to have to make decisions in business that they don't want to make. But they are going to figure out how to deal with this one way or the other. And at the end of the day, they're going to be fine whatever we do. They are not the ones that are going to be hurt by this. The ones that are going to be hurt by this are the people who are trying to make it. Are the people whose hours are going to be cut, whose jobs are going to be slashed, who are going to lose benefits that they're happy with. And sadly, because they're so busy with their lives, working and raising their kids, they may not realize why all this is happening until it's too late. So your question that you posed to the body was a very insightful one, because it goes to the heart of what this debate is about. Who are we fighting for? What are we fighting about? And I fear that to too many people still that are covering this process, this is all about an effort to keep the president from accomplishing something that he feels strongly about. Not true. This is an effort to fight on behalf of people that are going to be hurt badly by this. This is an effort to fight on behalf of people that do not have the influence or the power to fight here for themselves. That's why we're here. This is an effort to fight on behalf of people that are trying to do what my parents did. This is an effort to fight on behalf of the people that are trying to start a business out of the spare bedroom of their home. It's probably in violation of the zoning code, but they're trying to do it. This is an effort to fight on behalf of the people who are working every single day to achieve their full potential. This is an effort to fight on behalf of people who are working hard at jobs that are hard to get up in the morning to go do, but they're going to do it. Because the purpose of their life is to give their kids the chance to do anything they want. You know how many people I know like that? You can't walk 10 steps in my neighborhood without running into people like that. The whole purpose of their life, the singular focus of their life, is to make sure that their kids have a chance to do all the things they never got the chance to do. You know how many people like that there are around this country? They depend on the jobs that are being destroyed by Obamacare. They depend on the opportunities that are created about Obamacare. And that's wrong. And I hope that we'll be successful at this effort. Now, people are going to focus about how this vote's going to go down and this, that, and this ain't going to end here, guys. We're not going to stop talking about this no matter how the vote here ends up. We're going to continue to do everything we can to keep this from hurting the American people because it undermines the essence of our nation. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this goes right to the heart of the question you asked. Because Obamacare and big government in general makes it harder, not easier, for people that are trying to do what my parents did to achieve their dream as well. And so, I think your question goes, Senator Cruz, your question goes to the heart of what this debate is all about. And I would just yield back to you to encourage you to continue to highlight the impact that this law is having on real people and their real lives. Because I think it's going to take some time to break through the narrative out there that this is all just a big political fight between Republicans and Democrats, between the president and his opponents. Whether this law was called ObamaCare or not, we would have to oppose it because it's hurting real people who are trying to achieve the American dream.
I thank the senator from Florida for his questions, for his powerful insight about how this law would have impacted his family. And I will say this, I have no doubt that at every gathering, every hotel where Senator Rubio speaks, that there is not a bartender, there's not a waiter, there's not a dishwasher in the room who doesn't look over and think, I wonder if someday my daughter, my son, could be in the U.S. Senate. What an extraordinary statement. You know what? If we were in almost any other country on earth, you couldn't say that. Most countries on earth, if you're not born into a family of power and prestige and influence, you have no chance whatsoever into serving in a position of significant political leadership. Only in America. That's the opportunity this country is, and I have no doubt the inspiration it serves every day when Senator Rubio shares his story. And I have no doubt also that Senator Rubio is right, that if Obamacare had been the law, when his parents came from Cuba, when they were immigrants, when they were looking for jobs, when they wanted to support their family and eventually their young family when they had kids, that if they hadn't been able to get those jobs, or if they had had their hours forcibly reduced to 29 hours a week so they couldn't earn enough to provide for their children, to give them the food, to give them the education, to give them the housing that they needed, it could have had a dramatic impact. If Obamacare had been the law, it may very well be the case that Senator Marco Rubio would not be in the Senate right now. Because it may have been that his parents would have struggled so much to make ends meet that they wouldn't have been able to provide for him as a young boy the way they did, to give him the opportunities that they gave him, and he might not be here, and our country would be far the poorer. I know for me and my family, if my dad had not had that opportunity to get a job washing dishes for 50 cents an hour, if my mom had not gotten the opportunities to get her first jobs, there's a very good possibility I never would have had the chance to represent Texas. When you cut off opportunity for those who are struggling to climb the economic ladder, it impacts for decades, and it doesn't just impact them, it impacts their children and their children's children. And that leads to a second rhetorical question that I want to ask the chamber, but which it would not surprise me if it prompts in turn a question from Senator Rubio, which is Senator Rubio and I both have the privilege of representing states in which there is a tremendous Hispanic community. We both come from the Hispanic community, were raised in the Hispanic community, and we both have the great honor of representing a great many Hispanics, he in Florida, me in Texas. You know, some of the discussion of the Hispanic community focuses on individuals like his parents, like my father, who are young immigrants, who are struggling, who may not speak English, who are on the first or second rung of the economic ladder, and that describes a great many in the Hispanic community. But there are others who are not necessarily in that circumstance. You know, in the United States, there are right now approximately 2.3 million Hispanic small business owners. The Hispanic community is tremendously entrepreneurial. There are roughly 50 million Hispanics in the United States. That means roughly 1 in 8 Hispanic households is a small business owner. So the question I would pose rhetorically to the chamber is, what is the impact of Obamacare on the Hispanic community? What is the impact of the crippling impact on jobs, of the punitive taxes, of the 20,000 pages of regulations? What is the impact on those 2.3 million Hispanic small business owners? What is the impact on economic growth, on achieving the American dream? What is the impact on the Hispanic community? Because I am convinced there is no ideal that resonates more in the Hispanic community than the American dream. In the idea that any one of us, regardless of who our mother or father is, regardless of where we come from, any one of us, through hard work and perseverance and the content of our character, can achieve the American dream. And the question I would pose is, has Obamacare made it easier or harder to achieve the American dream? How has Obamacare impacted the Hispanic community?
Would the senator from Texas yield for a question without yielding the floor?
I'm happy to yield for a question without yielding the floor.
Senator, you asked, that's actually a great question, because we talk about people who are trying to make it. We talk about the people who are working hard and sacrificing to leave their children and their families better off. A disproportionate number of people that are trying to do that find themselves in minority communities. And you ask about the Hispanic community. I live in a Hispanic neighborhood. Even now, I live just blocks away from the famed Calle 8, 8th Street in Miami. And if you've never been there, I encourage you to come. In fact, the president actually visited an establishment about 4 blocks from my house when, I think it was back in 2010, when he was in town campaigning for one of the candidates. Literally, and I mean literally, every business, one after another, after another, after another, is a small family-owned or family-operated business. Every single one. It's the bakery next to the dry cleaner, next to the liquor store, next to the grocery store, next to the uniform shop that sells uniforms, next to the gas station, next to the banquet hall, next to the, it goes on and on and on. I invite you to come down and see it. Now there's a Pep Boys there, and there's you'll find a McDonald's, but even those franchises, by the way, are owned by families. So literally every business on 8th Street, on Calle 8, just blocks away from my house, one after the other, after the other, after the other, is a small business. So are all my neighbors. So I have a neighbor that runs an electronic alarm company, another neighbor who runs a pool cleaning business. Now, I'm just speaking about my neighborhood. That's, I think, the story of the country. Now, listen, there are very successful people, Americans of Hispanic descent, who started out as a big business and started out as a small business and now are a big business and have been very successful too. Of course. So like the rest of the population, it reflects the concerns of whatever challenges they're facing. But an enormous percentage of Americans of Hispanic descent also happen to be people that are trying to accomplish the American dream. And perhaps the strongest burning desire you will find in minority communities in general, and in particular the one that I know the best, the Hispanic community, is that burning desire to give their kids the chance to do everything they couldn't. So maybe by the time you got here, you were already into your late 20s or early 30s. And, because you could succeed. There's many stories of people that have come here at that age and have accomplished extraordinary things. They started in small business, and before you know it, they were being publicly traded. That's a great part of the American story. We celebrate that. But there are also countless people that work jobs their whole life. That's what they end up doing. They work those jobs so their kids could have the opportunity to get ahead. That is a very prevalent story in the Hispanic community. Now, interestingly enough, the Hispanic community is very diverse on a lot of different things. So obviously we have a strong Cuban-American presence in South Florida, but we also have a significant presence from South America. My wife's family is from Colombia. We have a very vibrant Venezuelan community. By the way, coming to the United States to escape big government gone horrible. They just posted, I don't know if you read this yesterday, they just posted military officers at the toilet paper factory in Venezuela because they're not producing enough toilet paper, and they think it's some sort of capitalist, imperialist plot to deny the people of Venezuela toilet paper. So they've now stationed troops at the toilet paper factory. This is the country, by the way, that many of those who find themselves on the American left loved going down and extolling the virtues of Chavez and how great a country it was. They can't, well, let me not say on the Senate floor what they can't do anymore, but they're struggling to provide toilet paper for their people. That's how good big government works. You want to see another socialist paradise, right? Go to Cuba. Infrastructure crumbling, people trying to get out of that kind of, there are no political freedoms in Cuba, but the economic freedoms are a disaster. Because big government doesn't work. Compare that to Chile. Compare that to Panama. Compare that to Colombia. Compare Colombia to Venezuela. Two countries living next to each other. A decade ago, Colombia was caught in a deep struggle with drug lords and drug cartels, and they still have problems with guerrillas and the FARC and all that. But Colombia has turned things around. Why? Two things. One, real leadership at the political level, and two, free enterprise. They embrace free enterprise. We have a free trade agreement with Colombia. There's prosperity in Colombia. Compare that next door to Venezuela, an energy-rich country, a country that is rich with oil, a country that has natural resources, advantages that Colombia doesn't have, Venezuela. And they can't even produce toilet paper because big government failed. In fact, there has been a massive migration of experts in the oil industry leaving Venezuela and moving to Colombia. Compare that to Mexico. Now, Mexico still has some challenges, but Mexico has a vibrant middle class. There is a real middle class in Mexico, and it's growing. Look at the moves the new president is making. Now, they're not going to open up the oil industry there the way that we would do it here in the United States, but they're going to make changes to the oil industry because they want to grow and they want to create prosperity. By the way, this holds great promise for our country. Stronger integration between Canada, the United States, and Mexico is very promising. We can cooperate on all sorts of things, from energy to security issues. I think that holds great promise. North American energy has the opportunity to displace energy coming from unstable parts of the world, like in the Middle East. But how is Mexico growing its economy? And what is Mexico thinking about doing in order to grow its economy and provide more prosperity for its people? They're thinking about embracing more free enterprise. Look at the countries in Latin America that are succeeding. Peru, Chile, Panama, Mexico, Colombia. I hope I'm not leaving anyone out. These are countries that are moving ahead. Now, they've got struggles and challenges, and it's not a clear upward trajectory because there are global challenges in the economy, but they're moving ahead. Look at the countries that are a disaster. Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, Nicaragua. What's the difference? What's the starkest difference between these countries, other than perhaps the individual lunacy of some of the leaders of these countries? What's the difference? The difference is the countries that are failing and embarrassing their people are the countries that are embracing big government and socialism. And the countries who are providing middle-class opportunity and upward mobility are the countries that are embracing more and more free enterprise. And so when you ask about the Americans of Hispanic descent, these are the countries they come from. They came here to get away from big government. Why is there a vibrant and growing Venezuelan community in Miami-Dade County, where I live? Because big government's destroying Venezuela. Why are there over a million Cuban exiles living in Miami and in New Jersey and concentrated in different parts of the country, including a sizable community in Houston, Texas? Because they came here to flee not just big government, but the oppression that comes from really big government and socialism and Marxism. Why do people cross the border from Mexico and come into the United States in search of job and opportunity? Because for a long time, Mexico didn't embrace free enterprise policies. It is now, increasingly, and what's happening in Mexico? A vibrant and growing middle class, a sense of upward mobility. Look, every country has challenges. They have challenges in Mexico, but they're trying to turn it around, and they're doing some good things to try to do that because they're embracing free enterprise. So the unique thing about it, Senator Cruz, is that Americans of Hispanic descent, particularly those here in the first generation or second, they've come here to get away from big government policies. Because in countries that have big government, you are trapped. You are trapped. In countries that have big government, the people that come from powerful families and powerful enclaves, they're the people that keep winning. In places where the government dominates the economy, as is disproportionately the case in the countries that immigrants come here from, those are places where the same people keep winning. The same companies are the biggest company 50 years ago is still the biggest company. The richest family in the country is still the richest family. The president is the grandson and the son of preacher. It's just over and over again. That's what big government does. It traps people in the circumstances of their birth. So what happens if you are a talented, ambitious, and hardworking person living in a country like that, frustrated and trapped? You try to get to the only country in the world where people like you even have a chance, the United States. And so we've got millions of people living in this country of Hispanic descent that experience that know what it's like to live in a place where you're trapped in the circumstances of their birth. And the reason why they love America is because here they are not limited by that. I have said oftentimes, and I think you would share this perception, in the story of your father, Senator Cruz, it's true that immigrants impact America. It's true, they do. Immigrants impact America, they change America, they contribute to America. But I promise you that America changes immigrants even more. And you find that in the Hispanic community. The impact that America has on immigrants once it opens opportunities for them. Long before my parents became citizens, they were Americans in their heart. And that's still true. You will still find that out there in the Hispanic communities. You will still find people that understand how special this country is because of the opportunities that it's giving them and their children. And that's why I think they will and are starting to understand how damaging this law may be. If you watch Spanish language television, they're running these advertisements now, talking about sign up for Obamacare, it's good for you. They're making it sound like this is going to be cheap and free insurance for people. And look, when you're working hard 10, 12 hours a day, you're not making a lot of money, maybe your employer doesn't provide health insurance, and along comes these politicians telling you, we're going to give you health insurance cheap and free. It's enticing. But that's not what's going to happen. And when people realize that, not only are they going to be upset, they're going to be livid. And when they go to work one day and they tell them, guess what? You're now a part-time worker, they're going to be livid. And when they go to work because they're working part-time or they go to school and they lose hours, they're going to be livid. And by the way, when they go back to work one of these days, they may be working at one of these places where they have health insurance, as over 70% of Americans do, and they're happy with it. And all of a sudden they find out, you know that health insurance you have? That's not our health insurance anymore. You have to go on this website and shop for a new one. If they go on the website today, they can't shop for anything. They haven't been set up yet. They're going to be livid. So when we talk about defending people who are trying to make it, people that are working hard to persevere and move ahead, I think that is the epitome of what you will find in the Hispanic community in this country. I think that is the typical story of people who are here. They are working hard to get ahead, and they want their children to have a better life than them. And there's only one economic system in the world where that's possible, and that's the American free enterprise system. And Obamacare directly undermines it. If for no other reason, we should repeal Obamacare because it undermines the free enterprise system, the single greatest eradicator of poverty in human history, the free enterprise system. The only system in human history that's allowed people to emerge from poverty and into a stable middle class and beyond, the free enterprise system. The only economic system in human history that rewards hard work, sacrifice, and merit, the American free enterprise system. And Obamacare is undermining it. And so is it not, Senator, as I yield back to you, is it not the case that what we are here doing today is not just standing against Obamacare? We are fighting in favor of the only economic system in human history, American free enterprise, where upward mobility is possible for so many people.
I thank the senator from Florida for his passion, for his heartfelt commitment to opportunity, for his understanding. This is not about the rich and powerful. The rich and powerful are just fine with Obamacare. Indeed, the rich and powerful are better than just fine with Obamacare. The rich and powerful get special exemptions. The rich and powerful get treated better because they're buddies with the current administration. And so big business, giant corporations get exemptions from Obamacare. Members of Congress get exemption from Obamacare. And mark my words, if Congress doesn't act to defund Obamacare to stop this train wreck before the end of the president's administration, unions are going to end up getting an exemption from Obamacare. It's going to be everyone that's a political friend of the administration, that has juice, that has power, will get exemptions. And the people that are left, you have nothing to worry about unless you don't happen to have several high-paid Washington, D.C. lobbyists on your staff. Unless you happen just to be an Hispanic entrepreneur, a single mom, a hardworking American trying to provide for his or her family, then maybe you have something to worry about. Because you're not going to get the exemption, because what the Senate has been saying to you is exemptions for everybody else, but not for hardworking American families. Mr. President, I believe if it doesn't apply to everyone, it should apply to no one.